The Buddha once said that the mind is like the open sky, always vast, always clear, only hidden by passing clouds. Take a deep breath now, and as you exhale, imagine those clouds drifting away. Find your most comfortable way to listen, maybe lying still with eyes closed, or sitting in quiet reflection as the world softens around you. Tonight's stories will help you look beyond the clouds. They are not rules to follow, but invitations to return to your own clear sky of awareness. Before we begin, share where you are listening from, or what feeling lives in your heart right now. Maybe gratitude, maybe sorrow, maybe peace slowly forming, like light at dawn. Breathe once more, softly and completely. And now our story begins. In the town of Rajagaha, nestled among ridges of stone and mist, the streets curled like vines through hills and markets. Every morning, as the sun brushed gold across tiled rooftops, the air came alive with the calls of merchants, the ring of temple bells, and the mingling scents of tamarind, burning incense, and warm, sweet rice. Life here was orderly, rhythmic, a blend of mountain silence and city song. But lately, that rhythm had broken, not from plague, not from drought, but from something deeper, more primal. Fear, not fear of armies or kings, but of a creature, Nalagiri, a bull elephant so massive that earth seemed to lean under his step. Captured from the wild mountains of the north, Nalagiri had been kept in the royal stables since he was young. Once a proud spirit, free to roam cliffs and bathe in wild rivers, now he was shackled day after day, year after year. The weight of captivity grew inside him like fire trapped in stone. He grew restless, then bitter, then dangerous. Stable boys quit, guards were replaced, chains grew thicker. Nalagiri's cries echoed through the stone halls like thunder rolling through empty skies. The people of Rajagaha whispered that madness had taken him, but not all feared him. One man saw an opportunity in that rage. Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, a monk by appearance, but a storm beneath the robes. Jealous of the Buddha's calm, his followers, his truth, Devadatta sought power, not peace. And when his teachings could not rival the Buddha's, he plotted instead. He went to King Ajatashatru, young and proud, his rule still soft around the edges, and he leaned close. "Let Nalagiri loose," he whispered. "Aim him at the Buddha. See what becomes of silent wisdom when tusks meet flesh." The king, tempted by spectacle or swayed by flattery, agreed. And so, one morning, before the city had fully woken, the iron gate to Nalagiri's pen creaked open. Chains were undone. Commands were given. The path was cleared. Nalagiri stepped forward, eyes wide, breath steaming, mind ablaze. He charged through market streets, through cloth stalls and fruit carts, scattering baskets and lives. People screamed, children ran, dogs howled and carts overturned. He did not walk. He tore the world open beneath him. And down that path, barefoot, cloaked in saffron robes, carrying only his arm's bowl, walked the Buddha. No guards, no weapons, no rush in his step, just presence. His disciples shouted from behind walls and corners, "Lord, turn back, the elephant comes, he will crush you." But the Buddha kept walking, not with recklessness, not with pride, but with compassion so still it could hold a mountain. As Nalagiri approached, The air thickened with heat and tension. His tusks gleamed, his trunk coiled like a whip. His roar shattered the morning hush. Mothers shielded their children, merchants fell to the ground. The entire city held its breath, but the Buddha stood. The elephant thundered toward him. The ground trembled, and then stillness. The Buddha raised his eyes and looked. He looked not at a beast, not at a weapon, but at a being in pain. He saw the chains, the years, the sorrow turned to rage. He saw the hunger for freedom twisted into madness. He saw a heart once wild, now broken by cruelty. And in his gaze, he held no fear, no judgment, only recognition. As Nalagiri neared, mere strides away from trampling the man before him, he met that gaze, and something changed. The wind quieted, the air cooled. The fire in Nalagiri's eyes flickered. He slowed, then paused. His ears twitched, his breathing hitched. He took one more step, then stopped. The Buddha stepped forward. Slowly, gently, one hand raised, not to strike, not to shield, but to bless. And Nalagiri knelt. He folded his legs beneath him, lowered his head like a branch under rain. A great groan, half sigh, half sorrow, escaped his chest. And there, in the middle of the street where rage had once ruled, the Buddha placed his hand on Nalagiri's brow. Not with domination, but with presence. And the elephant wept. Tears pooled beneath his eyes, streaking down the folds of his face, darkening the dust. His trunk coiled softly around the Buddha's arm, no longer as a weapon, but as a gesture of surrender. The city watched in stunned silence. The same elephant who shattered stone fences and snapped trees now sat like a disciple at the feet of peace. Devadatta, watching from the shadows of a colonnade, said nothing. His plot, like a snake uncoiled, had slithered away, not with defeat by force, but by a truth too gentle to resist. Later, when the sun rose fully and the city slowly exhaled, Nalagiri returned to the royal grounds, but no longer was he led by whip or chain. He walked slowly, willingly, like a monk returning from alms. The Buddha returned to his seat beneath a banyan tree, his bowl untouched, his robe still bright. And the people came. They came not to celebrate a miracle, but to understand a lesson. They asked, "How did you stop him?" And the Buddha replied, "Anger cannot be conquered by anger, but by love alone. Fear cannot be silenced by force, but by understanding. The wildness in others is often the cry of suffering, not wickedness." And so it was taught that true strength is not in the fist, not in the sword, but in the heart that stays open in the face of danger. The tale of Nalagiri passed from lips to scrolls, from scrolls to temples, from temples to time itself. Children would ask their mothers, "Is it true that the Buddha tamed the elephant?" And they would answer, "Yes, my child, but not with magic, with seeing. Seeing the pain in others, seeing the fear beneath fury, seeing the being behind the mask, and meeting it with love." Nalagiri lived out his days not as a beast of burden, but as a gentle giant, offering rides to children, watering temple gardens with his trunk, and standing calmly when the monks recited sutras beneath the trees. It is said that when he died, the earth grieved gently, and his spirit rose unchained. Some believe Nalagiri was reborn in a heavenly realm. Others say he was reborn among the disciples. But all agree on this, that in the still gaze of one awakened man, an ocean of rage was calmed, not by war, but by peace itself. There was once a monastery nestled in the cliffs above a wide, mist-covered valley. Travelers came from all over the land, seeking wisdom from the old abbot who lived at its heart. But no one ever entered without first passing through the gate of questions. It was a tall wooden door, weathered by time, bound in iron, and it never seemed to open, no matter how many times pilgrims knocked. Instead, beside the gate stood a young monk with a calm face and a single instruction. If you wish to pass, you must answer, "What keeps you from entering?" Some said, "My sins." Others said, "I'm not ready." One said, "I'm too angry." Another said, "I'm still seeking." To each answer, the monk bowed and said, "Return when you are not." And so the pilgrims would leave, some frustrated, some weeping, some silent. One day, a weathered traveller approached. She was older than most. Her robes were plain, her eyes clear. She stood before the gate and read the words carved above, "Liberation is here." Then she looked at the gate and realized there was no lock, no bolt, no bar, just a handle. She turned it. The door opened and she walked through. The monk beside the gate only smiled, because the lesson had never been in the answer. It had been in the assumption. This is the story of liberation, not as something earned, but as something already available, once illusion falls away. Commentary. Most of us believe the door is locked, that we must be perfect first, clean first, worthy first, empty of anger or sadness or self-doubt. But the Dharma does not wait for your perfection, it waits for your presence. The Buddha did not say, "You must transcend before you begin." He said, "See clearly." And in seeing, freedom unfolds. The gate of questions was never locked, but the mind said it was, because it clings to a self-image that believes, "I am not there yet. I am not enough. I am still broken." But brokenness too is part of the path, and sometimes it is the crack that lets the light through. Liberation is not far. It is not elsewhere. It is not earned. It is the moment you stop demanding anything of the moment and simply turn the handle. The traveller who opened the gate was not special. She had simply grown tired of pretending the barrier was real. She saw the door for what it was, just a door, and walked forward. The monks say the abbot greeted her without words, only a bow, because no celebration is needed for one who sees the obvious. This story is often told to new students when they first enter training. Some smile, some frown, but a few immediately stand up and walk to the edge of the room to check if the door is locked. And when it opens easily, you can always hear the soft laughter of awakening. So if you find yourself waiting for permission, waiting for a sign, waiting to be good enough to begin, ask, what if the door was never locked? What if I only needed to reach for it? And if your hand trembles, that's all right. Just turn the handle. The Dharma is not waiting behind it. The Dharma is the act of reaching, Before time was measured by stars, before mountains were named, before the sutras had been spoken, there was a vow. A single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the suffering of the world. I will not enter nirvana until all beings are free. This was the vow of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, not a god, not a savior, but a being who heard the cries of the world and stayed. In Sanskrit, his name means the one who hears the sounds of the world. In China, he is Guanyin, the one who listens. In Tibet, Chenrezig, the gentle-eyed protector. In Japan, Kannon, the goddess with a gaze like soft rain. He takes many forms, male, female, neither, all, because compassion is not bound by gender. It is a response, a presence, a hand that reaches out before the mind decides whether or not to help. The story begins long ago in the celestial realms where Avalokiteshvara practiced deeply and tirelessly. Lifetime after lifetime, he worked to free beings from suffering. He taught, he healed, he carried, he wept, and still the suffering did not end. Every time a life was soothed, 10 more were in pain. Every time one was saved, another was lost. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood at the edge of reality and looked down upon the world. He heard every cry, every mother losing a child, every man begging for bread, every animal caught in a trap, every being trapped in anger, desire, confusion. And in that moment, his heart broke. Not figuratively, it shattered. His body split into pieces, his head burst into 11 parts, his arms cracked and fell. His vow seemed too vast, the pain of others too great. And from the silence that followed, he wept. I have failed, he whispered. I cannot save them all. But the universe listens in strange ways, and just as Avalokiteshvara reached the edge of despair, a light appeared. Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, came forth, gently, patiently, lovingly. He gathered the pieces. He said nothing of failure, only this: you broke not from weakness, but because your compassion was real. And with a soft breath, Amida blessed Avalokiteshvara's broken form and transformed it. Now he had 11 heads to see in every direction and 1,000 arms, each with an eye in its palm to both see and act. Hands that could reach into every corner of the world. Hands that could soothe, protect, feed, carry, hold, mend. Not all hands were soft. Some held weapons to cut through illusion. Others held lotus flowers to cradle the broken. Some formed mudras of peace. Others reached out with empty palms. Each hand was compassion expressed. Each hand was love in action. This is why Avalokiteshvara did not abandon the world, because even in despair, he did not turn away. Because real compassion isn't about success. It's about showing up again and again, even when it seems hopeless. Especially when it seems hopeless. There's a story told in temples. A monk once asked a master, "What is Avalokiteshvara doing with so many arms and eyes?" The master replied, "It's like a man reaching for a pillow in the night. He does it without thinking." That is the heart of compassion. No calculation, no pride. just the instinct to help. Because suffering is not theoretical. It is immediate, and so compassion must be too. In the iconography, each hand of Avalokiteshvara holds a symbol. A wheel, a bell, a jewel, a book, a rope, a vajra, a bowl, a tear. Because compassion wears many forms. Sometimes it's guidance, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's nourishment, sometimes it's just being with someone who is grieving without fixing it. In one form, Avalokiteshvara appears with only two hands. One holds a lotus, symbol of purity rising from the mud. The other holds a vase, pouring the nectar of healing into the world. Because even with just two hands, if moved by compassion, you can save lives. In the Mahayana tradition, to walk the Bodhisattva path is to walk in Avalokiteshvara's footsteps, to take the vow, not for glory, not for escape, but for others, for the one crying next door, for the stranger across the world, for the part of yourself still in pain. There's a saying, when compassion truly arises, there is no I helping you, only the act itself. That is Avalokiteshvara, not a being to worship, but a mirror, a reminder of what you already are. When you listen with your whole body, when you act before being asked, when you feel another's pain like your own and still choose to love, you become one of the 1,000 hands. Commentary. This story is not mythology, it's instruction. You may not have 1,000 arms, but you have one. You may not have an eye in every palm, but you have awareness, and that is enough. Avalokiteshvara broke not from weakness, but from caring too much, and instead of being punished for it, he was expanded. His brokenness became his beauty. His sorrow became his vow. So if you ever feel too tender for this world, if you feel like your heart breaks too easily, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are listening. You are already walking the path of Avalokiteshvara. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In a small temple nestled between pine trees and fog, there burned a single candle. It was placed each morning in the center of the meditation hall. No glass shield, no tall holder, just a quiet flame in a shallow dish. It flickered gently as monks came and went. It was not large, not dazzling, but it was always there. Software steady, alive. One morning, a gust of wind swept through the open window. The flame bent low, danced wildly, then steadied, then bent again. A novice sitting nearby grew anxious. He reached to close the window, but the old teacher touched his arm and whispered, "Wait, let it breathe." The flame, though small, did not go out. It fluttered, dimmed, but held on. The room stayed still, and after a few moments the wind passed. The candle straightened, its glow calm once more. The teacher turned to the novice and said, "This is your mind. This is your breath. This is your life." A candle by nature is vulnerable. One sharp breath, and it's gone. One careless movement, and it's lost. But that fragility is also its power, because the candle doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't fight to stay lit. It simply responds, bows, sways, returns. In Buddhism, The flame is often used as a metaphor for consciousness, flickering, ever-changing, not a solid thing, but a process, a dance between wick, wax, and air. Your thoughts are like the flame, your body, the wick, your breath, the air that sustains it, and the wind. That's life. The candle cannot control the wind, but it learns to dance with it. And that is the teaching. The novice asked, "But what if the flame goes out?" The teacher smiled. "Then we light it again, and again, and again. This is the practice. You will lose your calm. You will be shaken. Your light will dim, but the wick is still there. The wax remains. You are never without the capacity to be rekindled. There is a Tibetan saying, better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. But even deeper is this. Learn to trust the candle even when the wind rises. In the days that followed, the novice watched the flame more closely. He began to notice how it moved, how it bent without fear, how it never clung to its shape from a moment before. And one morning, during Zazen, as a storm passed outside, he did not flinch. He simply watched the flame bend and return. And in that moment, something in him softened too. This is what meditation teaches, not how to still the wind, but how to let the flame bend without going out, how to meet life's changes with grace, how to stop fearing your own flicker. Grief is a wind, so is joy, so is anger, so is love. You cannot block the breeze without also losing the air you need to burn. You must stay open, even when it stings. Especially then, commentary. The candle and the wind is not a story about fragility alone. It's about resilience without resistance. It's about remaining warm, soft, and lit, even when the conditions shift. Even when nothing stays steady but your own willingness to begin again. We often think strength looks like staying the same. But sometimes strength is in swaying, in letting go, in trusting that the flame inside you is not so easily put out. You do not need to burn like a bonfire. You only need to glow enough to see your next step, to offer light to the person beside you, to remind the darkness, I am still here. The teacher once said, a candle gives all it has, and still the world is warmed by its passing. So be the candle. Even if your light flickers, even if no one sees, even if the wind blows harder tomorrow, burn anyway, not for show, but because this is who you are. The tree stood at the edge of the world. Its roots gripped the earth like memory. Its branches reached toward the sky like longing, and beneath it sat a man, still as a mountain, breathing, watching, waiting. His name had once been Siddhartha, but that name now lay behind him, like a robe folded and left at the forest's edge. He had left palaces, left hunger, left both indulgence and denial. And now, with the moon rising above the horizon and the world softening into dusk, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, not in search, but in surrender. His legs were crossed, his hands rested lightly in his lap. The breath moved through him like wind through reeds. Slow, even, empty of grasping. He had made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I see clearly, until I find the end of suffering. And so the night began. The stars emerged like scattered seeds across the dark. The forest exhaled. Animals stirred. The air cooled. Siddhartha's mind turned inward, like a lamp flame drawing into itself. He began to see, not with eyes, but with knowing. Visions came, clear, unforced, as if someone were whispering his past to him, life by life. He saw himself born in countless forms, as man, as woman, as child, as beast, as merchant, as slave, as prince, as pauper, each life blooming and withering, each desire rising and fading, each birth followed by loss. He saw himself die 1,000 deaths, not with fear, but with clarity, and for the first time he understood. The self is not fixed. It moves, it changes, it clings, it returns. He watched the thread of his existence unspool across time, and yet something beyond the thread remained still. He did not speak, he did not stir, but inside him, a door creaked open, and he stepped through. Midnight deepened. The forest held its breath. The moon climbed higher, softening the world in silver. Now he turned his gaze outward, not with judgment, but with compassion. He saw the lives of others, their births and deaths, their joys and sorrows, rising and falling like waves. He saw kings and criminals, lovers and thieves, monks and warriors, all bound by the same law, karma, intentions like seeds, actions like water, and from them the fruits of joy or suffering. He saw that no life stood alone. Each was a thread in a vast net. Each thought, each choice, each word sent ripples outward, reaching far beyond the speaker, the thinker, the doer. He saw how hatred returned as hatred, how greed bore more hunger, how ignorance looped endlessly like a wheel spinning in sand. And he saw too how kindness softened sorrow, how generosity opened hearts, how truth, spoken gently, could shatter lifetimes of illusion. And still, he sat, breathing, watching. The net of becoming stretched before him, vast, intricate, impossible to escape. Unless one saw the threads for what they were, not chains, but illusions. He closed his eyes, and the world began to tremble. The deepest hour of night, not even owls cried now, not even leaves moved, and within him, the final door unlocked. He turned his mind to the cause of suffering. Why do we suffer? Why do we cling? Why do we fear? And the answer rose, not like thunder, but like morning, clear, simple, radiant. He saw it all in a single breath. Ignorance gives rise to craving. Craving gives rise to clinging. Clinging leads to becoming. Becoming to birth. Birth to sorrow, decay, and death. And so the wheel turns. Again and again. But he also saw how it could be stopped. Not with violence, not with denial, but with clarity. With the eightfold path. Like stepping stones across a great river. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He saw that suffering was not a punishment, nor a curse, nor a mystery. It was a path, and paths could be walked. and walked until they ended. And as the final shadow lifted from his mind, as the first bird stirred in the distant branches, it happened. Not a flash, not a voice, not a miracle, but a knowing, a deep, still knowing. He had awoken. The sun crested the hills, slow and golden. The mist curled like incense through the trees. And Siddhartha, now the Buddha, opened his eyes. He looked out over the world, not with desire, not with fear, but with compassion so vast it had no name. He saw children born into love and hunger. He saw soldiers sharpening swords. He saw merchants counting coins. He saw mothers weeping over small graves. And he wept, not with sadness, but with tenderness, because they were all still sleeping, not foolish, not broken, just dreaming. He had been asleep once too, and now he was awake. It is said that Mara, the Lord of Illusion, came one last time, not with armies, not with demons, but with a whisper. Now that you are free, he said, leave them behind. They will not understand. They will mock you. They will twist your words. They will forget. And the Buddha listened. He sat with that thought, the thought of peace in solitude, of disappearing into the forest, of vanishing beyond suffering alone. But then he saw a farmer rising to begin the day. He saw a child carrying water. He saw a girl humming a tune she did not know was ancient. And he knew they were not lost. Just tired, just waiting, just needing someone to show them the way back to themselves. So he turned to Mara and said, they will understand. Some will. Even one is enough. And Mara vanished. He stood slowly, the grass beneath him still wet with dew. His knees ached, but his heart did not. He took his bowl, his robe, his breath, and began to walk toward the village, toward the people, toward the long road of teaching. He would speak not of gods, nor of punishments, nor of sacred fire, but of suffering, and how to end it, of breath, and how to follow it, of kindness, and how to live it. And so the man who once left his son sleeping, who had starved beneath trees, who had faced demons and silence and the unraveling of self, walked down from the Bodhi tree. And the world, though it did not know it yet, had already begun to wake. Because one man had seen clearly, had sat still, had not run, and had touched the truth. And from that stillness, a path was born, for all the world to walk. The boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the ox herding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, the mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, He is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, he sees a bent stalk, then a hoof print in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast, a silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is, a glimpse through the trees, a flash of black hide, a tail flick. The boy freezes, joy rises, and fear. Because now it's real, not just a concept, not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called, and when the boy steps closer, it bolts. 4th, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass. But he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm, the self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone. Dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox. Only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another. No duality. Only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too. In the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th, entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village, dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe, just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary: the ox herding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you. Waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, the monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the colour of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. Am I clinging to the Dharma itself? The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveler," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward. The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always." And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down. A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you." Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" "Then rebuild the raft," said the Buddha. "Relearn, begin again, but never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination, it is the guide." A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. "I have crossed," he said softly, and the Buddha replied, "Then walk freely." No further instruction, no ceremony. Just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. In a quiet valley, where mist clung to the morning hills and cranes walked through the wet grass, there lived an old farmer. His hands were rough from years of work, his back bent slightly, not from age, but from reverence for the earth. Each spring, without fail, he would walk into the flooded fields barefoot, carrying a satchel of seeds against his chest. And there, ankle deep in cold water, he would plant each rice seedling by hand. One, then another, then another. Row after row, hour after hour. One morning, a traveller passed by and watched the old man working. "Isn't there a faster way?" he called. The farmer didn't look up. "No." "But can't you just scatter the seeds and let them grow?" The farmer paused, then looked up, his face weathered by sun and time. He held up a single seedling, delicate and green. "If I rush this," he said, "it breaks." And then he smiled. "If I wait, it feeds a village." That is the lesson of the rice seedling. Not speed, not force, but patience. Because some things, especially the most important things, cannot be hurried. They need water, warmth, space, and time. We live in a world that rushes. We want answers now, results now, relief now. But the Dharma, like rice, grows slowly. You sit on the cushion. You breathe. Thoughts rise like insects on the water. You breathe again. Nothing seems to change. But underground, beneath your noticing, something roots itself. Just as the seed splits in darkness before any green breaks the surface. There is a story from the Buddha's life. A man came to him, desperate for wisdom. He asked for enlightenment in a single sitting. The Buddha said, "How long did it take the mango tree to bear fruit?" The man shrugged. "I don't know, a few seasons." The Buddha nodded. "And how many times did you pull at its branches to make it grow faster?" The man blinked. "None. That would harm it." The Buddha smiled. "Then why do you do that to your mind?" A rice seedling cannot be coaxed with impatience. It cannot be screamed into sprouting. It will not bloom on command. But if you plant it, nourish it, protect it from harm, it grows. And when the time is right, it gives back. Generously, silently, completely. Patience is not passivity. It is an active trust. It is waking every day to tend what may not show results. It is believing that something unseen is forming. Not because of magic, but because that is how life moves. There is another story. A young monk grew frustrated with his progress. He complained to his teacher, "I've been practicing for months. I still feel restless, still distracted, still myself." The teacher led him outside, pointed to the mountain, and said, "You're like someone walking uphill while staring at their feet. You can't see how far you've come because you're only looking at the mud. Growth is rarely visible when it's happening. You notice it in hindsight, in the way you respond to difficulty, in the way you hold silence, in the way you speak a little softer, when someone's voice shakes. That is the seedling rising. Sometimes the field floods. Sometimes birds eat the first shoot. Sometimes the sun is too strong. And still, the farmer returns. He doesn't uproot everything in frustration. He doesn't curse the seed. He waits. He plants again. Because patience is not about perfect conditions. It's about keeping faith through imperfect ones. Commentary. The rice seedling is not just a symbol. It is a mirror. A reminder that your growth does not need to be dramatic to be real. That your slow, quiet efforts are not wasted. That every time you return to your breath, every time you choose presence over distraction, every time you pause before reacting, you are planting something. And like the farmer, you may not see it today, you may not see it next week, but one day when someone asks how you became calm or kind or steady dash, you'll smile and think of all those unseen days, all those early mornings in the field, all those seedlings that grew while no one was watching. The path is long, but you are walking it, and that is enough. The gates of Kapilavastu had not changed. They still stood tall and carved with symbols of victory, still flanked by soldiers in polished armor, still framed by the scent of sandalwood and rose water poured in offering. But the man walking toward them now was not the same prince who once slipped away into the dark, his silks folded neatly beside a sleeping child. He wore no crown, no jewelry, only the ochre robes of a wandering monk, faded by sun and softened by dust. His feet were bare, his hands folded around a simple begging bowl. And though the guards stiffened at the sight of him, there was something in his stillness, his presence, that made them hesitate. "Is that?" one whispered. But the other could not answer, for it had been nearly 7 years since Prince Siddhartha vanished into the forest. 7 years since the kingdom was draped in grief and silence, since King Suddhodana walked the palace gardens alone, since Yasodhara raised their son Rahula beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Now the prince had returned, but not as a prince, not even as a man of the world. He returned as the Buddha, the awakened one. The message reached the palace like a whisper carried on wind. He has returned. In the great hall, King Suddhodana stood without speaking for a long time. Then, with deliberate steps, he left his throne. No guards followed him, no procession was summoned. He walked alone down the long stone corridor, past the memories carved into every wall. He found Siddhartha standing beneath the Bodhi tree that had been planted in the garden long ago. It was not the Bodhi tree, but it cast the same kind of peace, broad shade, dappled light, and the hush of old leaves. Father and son faced each other, one with hair white as ash and eyes heavy with time, the other with a shaven head and a face so calm it made the air feel still. "You left without a word," the king said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I had no words," the Buddha replied, "only the question. And now you return with answers. I return with understanding. Not to rule, but to teach. Not to reclaim, but to share." The king looked at him long and deeply, as if trying to trace the child he once cradled, the young man who rode out in golden chariots, the son who vanished like a dream before dawn. At last, the king nodded. "Then let your mother see you, and let the boy." Yasodhara did not run to meet him. She did not cry. She did not fall to her knees. She stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, her sari plain, her hair pulled back, her face worn not with age, but with waiting. "I knew," she said quietly. "I knew you had not died." The Buddha lowered his gaze. "I died to what I was," he said, "so that I could be born to what is." "And us?" she asked. "What are we now?" He stepped closer but did not reach out. The rules of a renunciant were clear. No touch, no home, no possession, and yet his eyes held something that made her breath catch. An ache, a reverence, a peace deeper than comfort. "I carry you with me," he said, "not in desire, but in truth. In knowing that even love must be freed from clinging to shine in full." Behind her, a boy's voice echoed through the hall. "Mother, who is it?" Rahula stepped into the light. He was 7, just tall enough to look up with question, just old enough to sense what was unspoken. His eyes, so like his father's, widened as he saw the man in robes. He looked at his mother, then back at the man. "Is this?" Yasodhara nodded slowly. "This is your father." The boy approached carefully, drawn not by familiarity but by gravity. The Buddha knelt, bringing his eyes level with the child's. Rahula looked at the robes, at the bowl, at the bare feet, dusty and calloused. "You are a king," the boy said. "I was," the Buddha replied, "but everyone says you will always be a king." "I have chosen another path." "Why?" The Buddha did not speak right away. Instead, he looked at Rahula, not with the eyes of a father returning, but with the gaze of one who sees the seeds of suffering in even the smallest questions. "To be a king is to protect borders," he said. "But the greatest kingdom is not land, it is the mind. I left to master that realm, and to help others do the same." Rahula stared at him, then reached out, tentatively, silently, and touched the bowl in his father's hands. "Are you hungry?" "I eat only what is given freely." The boy blinked. "I'll give." The next morning, as sunlight touched the eastern gate, the people of Kapilavastu gathered in the streets. They had heard. They had whispered. Some had doubted. Others had hoped. Now they saw. The Buddha walked barefoot through the city with his disciples behind him, his bowl held gently, his eyes neither lifted in pride nor lowered in shame. Just present. And beside him, a small boy walked, his steps careful, his face solemn. "Who is that?" people whispered. "That is his son," someone said. "That is Rahula." When the procession reached the palace gates again, Rahula turned to his mother. "I want to go with him," he said. Yasodhara's heart trembled. "You are still young," she whispered. "You have not seen the world." "But I have seen him," Rahula said, "and he is the world." She knelt and held his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, and let him go, not out of abandonment, but out of trust. Rahula turned to his father. "Teach me." That night, under a canopy of stars, the Buddha gave his son the precepts. A child novice, a seeker born not of blood, but of choice. He named him Rahula, not in casual use, but in truth. Fetter. For that is what the boy had been once, a golden chain pulling at his heart. But now the chain had turned to light. Not attachment, but connection. Not weight, but legacy. the Buddha looked at his son as he slept beside the fire, curled in a robe too big, holding a wooden begging bowl like a treasure. And for a moment, the silence was not empty. It was full. Years later, Rahula would become a monk in full, respected for his insight and restraint. He would ask deep questions and receive answers not as a prince's son, but as a seeker in his own right. But none would forget that first night. When the Buddha returned, not with chariots, but with calm, not to rule, but to gaze into his son's eyes, and say, without speaking, "I left so you would not inherit illusion. I returned so you could choose the truth." And in that silent gaze was everything a father could offer and everything a seeker could need. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. It was night when the master pointed. The moon hung low over the monastery roof, pale and full, casting silver light across the silent garden. A group of monks stood beside him, robes drawn tight against the wind. The master raised his hand and extended one finger toward the sky. "See that?" he said. The students nodded. "The moon." He shook his head. "Number that is the finger." Then he smiled softly. "And what it points to is the moon." The monks stood still, unsure. The wind moved the trees. The master lowered his hand and whispered, "Don't mistake the finger for the moon." This is one of the most repeated teachings in Zen, because the mind is hungry for signs, hungry for symbols, hungry for teachers, for teachings, for shapes and systems. It sees the finger and calls it truth, but the finger is just pointing. It is not the truth itself. Imagine you're lost in the forest. A guide lifts a lantern. You follow the light, but mistake the lantern for the destination. You begin polishing it, worshipping it, writing poems about its handle and flame. But you never leave the forest, because the lantern was not meant to be your home. It was meant to show you the path. That's what Zen does. It points. But if you hold too tightly to the pointing, you never arrive. Buddha's words, the sutras, the rituals, even meditation, they are fingers. Beautiful, wise, luminous fingers. But if you cling to them, if you name them truth, you stop short of the moon. A monk once asked his teacher, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" The teacher held up a flower, just a flower. The monk bowed. He understood, because the flower was not the answer. It was the invitation to stop asking, to just see, to be. There's a story of a man crossing a river. The bridge is narrow, the current strong. Halfway across, he freezes, looks down at the water and panics. He shouts to a traveler behind him, "Help me understand this bridge." The traveler laughs gently. "You don't need to understand it," he says. "Just walk." Zen does not fear the unknown. It welcomes it, because the unknown is where truth lives. Not in definitions, but in direct experience. Not in the finger, but in the sky beyond it. Many people come to Zen hoping for words that explain. But the moment something is explained, it is no longer what it was. It becomes a concept, a mental model, And reality, true, breathing, silent reality, evaporates behind the map. Once, a young monk read every sutra he could find. He could recite the Eightfold Path, the 5 aggregates, the 4 noble truths. He knew Sanskrit terms. He quoted the Buddha with reverence. But he was restless. He asked his teacher, "Why do I still feel distant from awakening?" The teacher smiled and walked him outside. The moon was rising. The teacher pointed. The student followed the finger. "See it?" the teacher asked. "Yes," the monk said. "The moon." The teacher chuckled. "Number, that's still my finger." The monk blinked, and then, like a soft breeze over water, he understood. To point is not to possess. To teach is not to trap. Even the Buddha said, "My teachings are like a raft, meant to cross the river, not to carry on your back once you reach the shore." But many cling to the raft. They decorate it, argue over whose raft is best, then forget to cross. The finger and the moon, words and truth, map and terrain. All teachings are like this. Zen does not dismiss the finger, but it urges you not to stop there. Because no teacher can give you the moon. They can only point. The rest is silence, attention, direct seeing, commentary. This koan is not just about Zen. It is about how we relate to everything. A lover says, "I love you," and we cling to the phrase, replaying it in our minds. But the real love was in the look, in the moment, in the breath before the words. The words were the finger, the love was the moon. We read books about mindfulness, but forget to be mindful. We quote wise sayings, but live unawake. We chase spiritual techniques, but miss the moment itself. The way the light falls through leaves, the sound of tea being poured, the feel of wind on bare skin. These are the moon, director. Immediate, alive. When you sit in meditation, thoughts will rise. Names, labels, questions. That's the finger, let it point. But keep looking beyond, to what has no name. No answer, only presence, only this, only now. If you walk away with only the finger, you miss everything. But if you let it lead you, quietly, gently, without clinging, you may one day look up and find yourself under the full moon, smiling, and no longer needing to explain why. He never spoke a word, not to the monks, not to the villagers, not even when invited to tea by the abbot himself. He simply bowed and walked and bowed again. They called him the silent pilgrim. He had no belongings except a small cloth bag and thick wooden sandals worn smooth from years on the road. His face was weathered by wind and sun. His back slightly bent, not from age, but from reverence. Because every third step, he stopped, placed his palms together, and bowed to the earth. Step, step, bow, step, step, bow. He travelled like this for hundreds of miles, through rice paddies and dusty plains, through mountain passes and city streets, through cold rain, sharp sun, and falling snow. He never begged, never asked, never preached, only bowed. When he reached the gates of a remote temple high in the hills, a monk ran inside to announce, "The pilgrim has come." Curious, the monks gathered. Some stood with folded arms. Others watched from the steps. One scoffed. "What is this? A show?" Another whispered, "Surely he must be seeking merit or praise." But the abbot only smiled. "Wait. Watch." The pilgrim reached the stone path before the temple gate. Step, step, bow. His palms touched the gravel. His forehead met the earth. He rose slowly and continued. All morning he bowed up the path. By noon he had reached the courtyard. The air was silent, except for the soft crunch of gravel and the long breath between bows. Step, step, bow. By evening, he reached the base of the temple steps. He did not climb them. Instead, he bowed once more, then turned, and began his journey down the mountain. Step, step, bow. The monks were stunned. He never entered. He never asked to stay. He came all this way just to bow. The abbot nodded. And in bowing, he entered more deeply than any of us. This is the story of wordless devotion, of practice not performed, but lived in the marrow of each step. Commentary. In the West, we often think wisdom must be spoken. That truth arrives in grand lectures, eloquent teachings, powerful arguments. But sometimes the greatest teachings are silent. The silent pilgrim did not explain his path. He became it. With each bow, he gave himself to the moment, to humility, to gratitude, to presence. He bowed not to worship the earth, but to remember he belonged to it. In Buddhism, we bow not out of subservience. We bow to let go of the self, to surrender ego, to honor interbeing. The sky does not rise without the sun. The tree does not grow without the soil. You do not breathe without the generosity of everything around you. To bow is to remember that. The pilgrim didn't need a teacher. Every grain of dust was his teacher. Every blister, his scripture. Every bow, a verse in the sutra of the path. He asked for nothing, judged no one, corrected no teachings. He gave only his body, his time, his breath. That was his offering. That was his sermon. One monk, deeply moved, asked the abbot, "Should I walk like that? Bow like that?" The abbot said, "Not unless your heart is already bowing. It's not about copying the form. It's about sincerity. Some bow with their bodies and judge with their minds. Others bow with their actions and remain upright inside. But true bowing begins within. It is a quiet crumbling of pride, a surrender of the need to be seen, a softening into the now. There is a Zen phrase, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." The silent pilgrim had no preference for praise or obscurity, for arrival or delay. His goal was not the temple. His goal was the bow itself. Step, step, bow. Again and again, until there was no one left doing it. Only the gesture, only the giving, only the way. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you can bow too, not just with your body, but with how you listen, with how you wait, how you serve, how you show up for the dust on the floor or the silence in a friend's eyes. To bow is to soften, to slow, to remember what matters, and sometimes to say everything without a single word. A monk walked along a dusty trail, his robe fluttering slightly with each step. The morning air was clear, the sun warm but soft. A few birds called lazily from the treetops. But the monk's brow was furrowed. He had been sent to deliver a letter to a nearby monastery, and he was late. He had misread the schedule, taken the wrong turn, and now walked quickly, heart agitated beneath his robe. Each step struck the earth too hard. Each breath was shallow. His mind raced ahead. Will they think me careless? How could I have made such a mistake? I should have left earlier. What kind of monk forgets the path? Then he heard a voice behind him. Excuse me, Sir Monk. He turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, running up the path barefoot. He held something cupped in his palms. The monk paused. Yes? The boy stopped, panting, and held out his hands. Inside them sat a small round pebble, no bigger than a thumbprint. It's beautiful, isn't it? The boy said. The monk looked down. It was smooth, flecked with tiny bits of crystal, glinting gently in the light. I found it near the stream, the boy said. It looked lonely. I thought maybe someone should notice. The monk smiled politely. That's kind of you. He began to turn away, but the boy looked up at him and said something that stopped him mid-step. Did you see any of the flowers you passed today? The monk blinked. What? The boy tilted his head. You've walked almost a mile. The path is full of little blue flowers, but your robe is dusty and your eyes are tight. You didn't see any of them, did you? The monk looked down at the pebble again. Then slowly, he sat on a flat rock at the side of the path. The boy grinned and plopped down beside him, offering the pebble again. And the monk, still holding the unopened letter, took it gently in his hand. This is the story of mindfulness in ordinary things. Commentary. In Zen, we often speak of awakening as though it is some great flash of light or a sudden shift in consciousness. But often, awakening is small, like noticing a flower you've walked past for weeks, or hearing the sound of your own breath after a hard day, or holding a pebble that simply is. The monk had been walking as if his destination were the only thing that mattered. His hurry had made him blind. Not because he lacked wisdom, but because he had left the present moment behind in favor of imagined shame and future apologies. The boy, with no training and no robe, was more awake than he, not because he had studied sutras, but because he saw what was in front of him, and he shared it. There's a Zen phrase: the miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. The monk delivered the letter later that day, but he took a different path back, slower, softer. He paused to notice the flowers the boy had spoken of, tiny blossoms with indigo petals, scattered like spilled paint across the roadside. He bowed to them, then reached into his robe and touched the small pebble still in his sleeve. After that, he kept it on the windowsill beside his mat, not as a relic, but as a reminder that awareness begins not with enlightenment, but with noticing what's already here. We spend our lives waiting for bigger signs, bigger truths, more impressive moments. But the sacred is everywhere, in the weight of a spoon, the hush of dusk, the rhythm of footsteps, the coolness of a cup before tea is poured. The boy in the story grew up. He never became a monk. But he taught his children to pause, to touch the bark of trees, to look into puddles after rain, to name the colors of the sky at sunset. And his children did the same. Sometimes the greatest teachers do not stand at the front of a hall. They kneel by a stream and lift a stone, so let the pebble teach you. Let it slow you down. Let it whisper, "This moment matters too." As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. They worked for 7 days without rest. 4 monks, bent over low tables, hands steady, breath slow. Grain by grain, they placed colored sand onto a wide wooden platform, creating a mandala of breathtaking beauty. Circles inside circles, lotus petals, Buddhas seated in calm symmetry, tiny bridges crossing into sacred realms. It was more than art, it was a world. And they built it, knowing it would not last. Villagers came to watch, children gasped, old men wept. Even travelers paused on their way to market, drawn in by the silence, the precision, the colors blooming under careful fingers. Each night, the monks covered the mandala with a cloth. Each morning, they returned to their posture, like time itself had been paused. Not one grain out of place, not one breath wasted. On the 8th day, the abbot arrived. He walked around the mandala in silence, once, twice. Then he bowed and said only 4 words, "It is time now." One of the monks picked up a long white feather. He reached toward the center of the mandala and drew a single line through it. The design fractured instantly. A second stroke, then a third. The patterns dissolved. The colors blurred. What had taken a week to build unraveled in minutes, like a dream returning to mist. Some gasped, others cried, but the monks only bowed, then gathered the sand in a simple clay bowl. They walked together to the river. With a small prayer, they tipped the bowl, and the sand returned to water, color to flow, form to formlessness. Gone. This is the story of letting go, of beauty not owned, of effort not clung to, of creation not possessed. Commentary. The sand mandala is one of the clearest teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, not because of how it looks, but because of what happens after. In the West, we celebrate permanence. We build to last. We frame art. We publish books. We try to leave a legacy. But in Buddhism, there is no permanence, only appearance, only change, only flow. The monks poured their hearts into the mandala, their care, their breath, their presence. They built it not despite its impermanence, but because of it. They knew it would vanish, and they still gave everything. That is love without grasping, effort without ego, joy without needing to possess. The act of destroying the mandala is not cruelty, it is compassion. A reminder, everything we cling to will one day dissolve. Beauty, youth, achievement, even memory. We can either mourn this endlessly or bow to it. There is a phrase in the Diamond Sutra. All conditioned things are like a dream, a phantom, a bubble, a shadow, like dew or a flash of lightning. Thus we shall view them. It doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters more deeply when you know it's passing. You love your child's laughter more when you know they won't be 5 forever. You savour tea more when it's the last cup from the pot. You forgive faster when you realize tomorrow isn't promised. One woman who watched the mandala's destruction approached the abbot in tears. "All that work," she said, "and now it's gone." The abbot bowed. "That is why it was precious," he replied. "When we cling, we suffer. When we release, we flow." This doesn't mean becoming detached or cold. It means seeing clearly and trusting what passes. Trusting that even after the mandala is gone, the hands that built it are still steady. The breath that guided it is still with you. The river still carries the colors. Life is not meant to be grasped. It is meant to be given. Again and again. Like sand to a current. So build your mandalas. Love your people. Paint your days with color. But don't try to trap the moment. Let it come. Let it shine. And when it's time, let it go. And perhaps, like the monks at the river, smile while you do. The path was dry that day. Dust lifted from the earth like breath from grief. It clung to her ankles, soft and persistent. But Kisa Gotami did not notice. Her feet moved forward, bare and steady. Her arms, once empty with loss, now carried the truth. It had been some years since she had fallen at the feet of the Buddha, begging for medicine to save her dead child. Then, he had sent her through the city, asking for a mustard seed from a house untouched by death. At every door she knocked, and at every door sorrow had already sat before her. Now she understood, no house was free from loss. But this story begins not with her arrival, nor her wisdom, but with the silence before it. Kisa Gotami was once radiant with joy. She had married into wealth, borne a healthy son, and laughed easily beneath flowering trees. Her life was not lavish, but it was full. Her husband was kind. Her in-laws praised her for her quiet strength and good nature. And her child was the axis of her world. His laugh echoed through the garden, a sound so bright it seemed to ripple the petals of the lotus pond. But when sickness came, it moved like fire in dry grass. First, a fever, then the cough, then the silence. Her husband wept, her in-laws prayed. Neighbors brought herbs, ointments and whispered remedies passed down through generations. But nothing stilled the trembling of the boy's limbs. Nothing cooled his burning skin. And then, one still morning, as dew clung to the leaves and the world turned quietly onward, he stopped breathing. Something in Kisa Gotami's mind refused the truth. It broke, not like glass, but like a door slammed shut against a storm. She did not bury him. She could not. Instead, she wrapped his small body in linen and cradled him close, as she always had. She walked barefoot through the streets, her face blank with disbelief, her voice hollow with pleading. "He is only sleeping," she whispered to merchants. "There must be something, some medicine, some root. Please help me wake him." People pitied her. Some turned away, ashamed. Others wept at the sight but dared not speak. A few offered dried herbs or quiet prayers, not to cure, but to comfort. But none could give her what she asked for. Then one old man, gentle and weathered like the bark of the Bodhi tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go to the Buddha. He sees clearly. Perhaps he will know what to do." So she did. Through dust and heat, she walked to the monastery, her arms still wrapped around the stillness of her child. Her eyes, dry now, saw only hope. When she reached him, the Buddha met her gaze with unwavering calm. He did not flinch at the bundle in her arms. He did not speak quickly or softly or with sorrow. He simply said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home where death has not visited. Then I will help." Kisa Gotami bowed deeply, grateful beyond words, and ran. House after house, door after door. She knocked. She asked. She waited. At the first door, a woman with kind eyes shook her head. "My brother died last winter," she said. "I'm sorry." At the next, a man held his son in his arms and said, "If only. We lost his mother at childbirth." At another, a young girl barely older than her own son opened the door, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "Grandfather passed last night," she whispered. Each story struck her not like a blow, but like a chisel, slowly carving away at her illusion. With every encounter, her burden changed. The weight of the child in her arms remained the same, but the grief within her no longer stood alone. It became something shared. A river of sorrow running through many homes, not just hers. And in that shared space, she found the first breath of peace. She returned. She did not knock this time. She did not beg. She simply walked to the Buddha and placed the body of her son before him. Then quietly she said, "I see now. There is no house without sorrow." The Buddha nodded, and without ceremony, without demand, he welcomed her into the Sangha. She shaved her head, took on the robes, learned to breathe again, learned to walk not to escape grief, but to carry it with grace. The seasons passed like silk through her fingers. She became a teacher, not of words, but of presence. Her voice was never the loudest, nor her gestures the grandest. But when she sat beside those in pain, their breathing slowed, their trembling eased. She was the stillness they had forgotten could exist. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the bamboo grove, a young woman arrived at the monastery. Her face was drawn with confusion. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. Her eyes were red, but not yet emptied of tears. She had lost her father. Suddenly, cruelly. Though she had performed all the rites, burned all the offerings, sat in silence beside her mother, something inside her chest would not still. "I do not know what to do with this ache," she said. She asked for Kisa Gotami. The nun sat beside her beneath a neem tree. Birds moved through the leaves above them, and the distant sound of sweeping could be heard from the monastery steps. Kisa did not rush. She listened, let silence breathe between them. Then she placed a small, smooth pebble in the girl's palm. "Carry this," she said, "for 3 days. But each day, speak to one person about someone they have lost. Ask for their story. Then return." The girl did as told. And on the 3rd morning, she returned, eyes swollen, chest raw, but breath moving freely. She knelt at Kisa's feet and wept, but the tears came with space, with rhythm, with healing. "I thought I was alone," she said. Kisa Gotami nodded. "Grief is a shadow," she said. "It grows darker when we sit beneath it alone. But when we share it, it moves, it thins, it teaches." The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "What did it teach you?" Kisa looked to the far hills, where the morning light softened the edges of the earth. "That the heart does not break from love," she said, but from the illusion that love can be possessed. My child was not mine. He was a gift. So were the mornings we shared, the soft sound of his feet, the questions he asked at twilight. His death was not punishment. It was part of the changing tide. We do not own the ocean, but we can learn to swim. The girl placed her hand over her heart. Will this ache ever leave? No, Kisa said gently, but it will grow roots, and from those roots something will bloom. You will never be the same, but you may become more. The girl bowed low, forehead touching earth, and so another seed was planted, not of mustard, but of compassion. Kisa Gotami came to be known not for her loss, but for her light, for the way she listened without rushing, spoke without preaching, held without clutching. She walked through villages not to convert, but to sit, to be, to remind those in pain that no house stands outside sorrow, and no heart must bear it alone. Thus, the lesson of the mustard seed lived on, not in the search, but in the returning, not in the seed itself, but in the soil of shared humanity it revealed. He was the oldest monk in the monastery. No one quite remembered when he had arrived. He had been there before the abbot, before the bell tower was built, before the bamboo grove behind the kitchen had taken root. They called him Elder Wen. His robe was patched at the sleeves, his back curved like a bowed reed, and his eyes were always smiling, like he had seen something long ago and never forgotten it. He didn't teach, not formally, but every morning he lit the incense before dawn. Every afternoon he watered the moss around the garden stones, and in the evening he swept the meditation hall in silence, the broom moving in time with his breath. You could walk past him and miss him entirely, unless you were paying attention. Then you would feel it, that quiet radiance, like sitting near a warm lamp on a winter night. One spring, Elder Wen stopped coming to morning service. He didn't light the incense, didn't sweep, didn't bow. He stayed in his small corner room beside the main hall, lying on his straw mat with hands folded gently over his chest. He was dying. The news spread quickly. Monks whispered in the corridors. Some feared, some mourned. Some tried to distract themselves with chores. But one by one, they made their way to his room. To say goodbye, to ask for wisdom, to seek some final teaching. But Elder Wen said almost nothing. He just smiled. That same soft smile, unmoved by sorrow, unafraid of what came next. One young monk sat at his side and finally asked, "Master, are you not afraid?" Elder Wen opened his eyes. "Afraid of what?" he whispered. "Of leaving." The old monk chuckled softly, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Leave where?" He looked around his humble room. "There is nowhere to go." Another monk asked, "What is your final instruction?" Elder Wen blinked slowly, then raised one trembling hand and pointed to the teacup beside his bed. It was half full. The tea had long gone cold, but the sunlight touched it just so, glinting off the rim. He smiled again, then closed his eyes, and that evening he passed. As gently as a flame curling into smoke. No struggle, no fanfare, just a long exhale. And stillness. The monks held a memorial, They chanted sutras. They carried his body wrapped in white cloth to the forest. But what they remembered most was not the ceremony. It was the smile. This is the story of death without fear. The final bow of a life lived in awareness. Commentary. In the West, we prepare for death with wills, hospitals, and quiet dread. We pretend it is far away, or we avoid it entirely. But in Zen, death is not the enemy. It is the mirror that shows you whether you were truly alive. Elder Wen was not afraid because he had already practiced dying. Every time he let go of a grudge, every time he stepped aside for someone younger, every time he bowed in silence, releasing his self-importance. The teacup was his final teaching, so ordinary, so overlooked. But it held the whole Dharma. A cup is useful because it is empty. It can hold, receive, release. But if you cling to the cup itself, you miss the tea. If you fear the cup breaking, you never enjoy what it holds. Elder Wen was ready to leave because he had drunk deeply of life. He had tasted the tea, and he didn't cling to the cup. There's a Zen saying, "Let death come like a welcome guest." That doesn't mean we rush toward it. It means we don't turn our back on it. We live with it, like a quiet friend who reminds us not to waste time. Elder Wen's room is empty now, but the moss he watered still thrives. The broom still leans against the wall. The teacup still rests on the low table, cleaned and dry. And his smile lives in the memory of every monk who sat beside him and realized, stillness is not defeat. Stillness is trust. You do not need to fear the end. You only need to live in such a way that when it comes, you can greet it with a breath and a smile. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a young monk who feared change. He feared the end of things, the falling of leaves, the fading of youth, the loss of voices he loved. Every impermanence felt like a theft. And though he studied the teachings, sat each morning in silence, recited the truths of anicca, still, his heart gripped what it knew. One day, he sat with his teacher beneath the open sky. The wind was gentle. The air smelled of dry grass and pine. Above them, clouds drifted, vast and slow, casting soft shadows across the stone. The teacher pointed upward and said, "Look, what do you see?" The monk replied, "A cloud." The teacher nodded. "Now keep watching." They sat for a long while. Minutes passed. Then hours. The cloud changed shape. Then shape again. Then thinned and vanished. The monk frowned. "It's gone." The teacher smiled. "Number only its shape is gone. Its water is still in the sky, or falling as rain, or becoming mist. It hasn't ended, only transformed." The monk was silent, and something inside him softened. This is the story of impermanence, and the truth that beyond all change, there is a space that never breaks. Commentary. We fear change because we identify with form. We think, I am this body. I am this name. I am this role, this relationship, this belief. And when those dissolve, we feel ourselves dissolve. But the Buddha taught, all compounded things are impermanent. All form changes, but emptiness remains. Emptiness is not void. It is spaciousness, the sky that holds all clouds without being touched by them. The nature of mind is like that. Thoughts arise like weather, bright, stormy, dense, scattered, but the awareness that sees them, it remains untouched, unshaken, vast. When you cry, the sky is not wet. When you laugh, the sky does not echo. And when the self seems to break apart, the sky simply watches. The young monk began to observe things differently. When a flower wilted, he did not mourn its death. He saw its petals return to soil, its stem feed the ants, its color fade into memory. He saw its life ripple onward. He came to understand that nothing truly ends. The cloud becomes rain, the rain becomes river, the river becomes mist, the mist becomes cloud again. So too with us. What we call a self is a cloud, shifting, dancing, dissolving, but never disappearing. And behind it all, the sky waits, not as a place, but as a metaphor for mind, open, unchanging, whole. This is why the Buddha smiled when asked, "What happens after death?" He did not rush to answer, because the question clings to form, and the truth cannot be grasped like a stone. It can only be realized. Like seeing the sky for the first time after years of watching only clouds. The monk later wrote, "My thoughts are not me. My name is not me. I am the space between all that comes and goes." This is not to say life has no meaning. On the contrary, its beauty lies in its movement. Because clouds are only beautiful because they change, and love is precious because it cannot be frozen. So when you feel yourself clinging to a moment, to a face, to a version of yourself long gone, pause, look up, and remember, you are the sky. Everything else is passing weather. In the days when animals still spoke the language of the wind and trees, there lived a turtle in a wide, sparkling pond near the edge of a small village. The water was clean, the lilies bloomed, dragonflies shimmered like tiny blades of light, and frogs sang in harmony beneath the moon. And in the center of it all, floating lazily on a flat, sun-warmed rock, was a turtle with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. He was clever, observant, wise even, but he had one weakness. He could not stop talking. This turtle, who in a past life had been the Buddha, spent his days offering advice to fish, telling stories to tadpoles, and correcting the herons who perched too long on the reeds. He spoke of the stars, of the weather, of the foolishness of men and the arrogance of birds. And many listened at first. But over time, some began to swim a little farther from his rock. The frogs coughed politely and leapt away. Even the dragonflies found quieter lily pads to rest on. Still, the turtle spoke. He spoke when no one was near. He spoke when others slept. He spoke not to be heard, but because silence felt like drowning. One summer, the rains did not come. The sky cracked but gave no water. The pond shrank. Lilies withered. The fish moved deeper, their numbers fewer each day. 2 wild geese, passing overhead, noticed the shrinking pond and circled down. They landed beside the turtle and dipped their beaks in the muddy shallows. "This place won't last much longer," one said. "Soon it will be dry." The other nodded. "We should help whoever we can." The turtle, curious, swam closer. "Help? How?" The first goose blinked. "We will carry the small fish to deeper waters, and if you like, we can carry you too." The turtle's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "Of course," said the second goose, "but only if you can stay silent." "Silent?" the turtle echoed. "Yes," said the first. "We will hold a stick between our beaks. You must bite down on the center and hold on. But if you speak, even one word, you'll fall." The turtle hesitated. Not talk? For an entire journey? He looked around. The pond was shrinking. His friends were gone. The mud cracked beneath the sun. He took a breath. "Very well," he said. "I will be silent." The next morning, the geese returned with a sturdy stick. They each gripped one end in their beaks. The turtle bit down on the center with determination. Together, they rose into the sky, wings strong, the turtle dangling like a pendant between them. He had never seen the world like this before. Forests stretched like ocean waves. Rivers wound like silver ropes. Hills rolled beneath them like sleeping beasts. And far below, people looked up and pointed. "Look!" a child cried. "A flying turtle!" Laughter rippled through the village. A man shaded his eyes. "What a strange sight! A turtle who thinks he's a bird." They laughed louder. They clapped and jeered. The turtle heard every word. His mouth tightened on the stick. He thought of clever comebacks, of biting remarks, of lessons he could teach these fools from above. And then he couldn't help himself. "I'll show you who's foolish." But the moment his mouth opened, he fell. Down, down through the sky, tumbling through wind and silence and regret until he struck the earth and never rose again. The geese circled once, then flew on. And below, the villagers stood in stunned silence beside the broken shell of the creature who could not stay silent. Later, when this tale reached the forest monasteries, a monk asked the Buddha, "Was the turtle's mistake pride?" "No," said the Buddha, "it was attachment. Not to his body, but to his voice, to the belief that every thought must be shared." He looked at the monk kindly. "There is wisdom in knowing when to speak, but greater wisdom in knowing when not to." And so, the story of the turtle who couldn't stop talking passed from village to village. Not as mockery, but as reminder that words are like seeds. They grow even when we forget we've planted them, and some, if spoken at the wrong time, can fall like stones. Because restraint is not weakness. It is strength disguised as silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest wisdom of all. The master was dying. Not suddenly, not tragically. Just quietly, like a season completing itself. His name was Master Togen, and he had taught for over 40 years. He never raised his voice, never insisted, never asked to be followed. But people came to him, pilgrims, monks, farmers, children. Because when he looked at you, you felt seen beyond your name. Now, his breath was thin, his hands still, his body a whisper of what it once was. The disciples gathered at his bedside, each wondering the same thing. Would he speak? Would he leave them with one final truth? A farewell teaching? A verse? A koan? They waited, hearts leaning forward. But Master Togen said nothing, not even a word. He only gestured, weakly, to the small table beside his mat. Upon it stood a single candle, lit and steady. The wax had melted low. The flame burned soft but sure. The master's eyes lingered on it. Then he closed them and let go. The room held its breath. The disciples watched the candle. It flickered once, then twice, and just as the master's body cooled, the candle went out. No wind, no touch. It simply ended. This is the story of teaching through presence, of the final lesson not spoken, but lived. Commentary. We often believe the greatest teachings must be loud, dramatic, revolutionary, clear. But in Zen, the most profound truths are quiet. They arrive not with thunder, but with the stillness of a candle extinguishing itself. Master Togen's disciples wanted words, something to cling to quote, to remember. But he gave them something deeper, a mirror. The candle was his body, burning with presence, giving light, warming others, and when its time came, it did not resist, it did not protest, it simply completed its purpose and disappeared. That is the nature of life. To arrive, to offer, to pass. To resist this is to suffer. To accept it is to awaken. Some monks cried. Some stared at the floor. But one young disciple remained still, eyes on the wick. He bowed deeply and said, "I understand." The abbot later asked him, "What did you understand?" The young monk replied, "Nothing lasts, but everything lights the way while it's here." We fear death, but what we fear more is the idea of being forgotten, of being meaningless. So we seek last words, final victories, something to prove we existed. But Master Togen left only a flame, because the point was not to be remembered. It was to burn fully while here. The candle did not save its wax, did not ration its glow. It gave everything, slowly, humbly, until there was nothing left to give. And then it bowed out. That was his teaching. There is a Zen phrase, "When the light is gone, do not seek it in the ashes." The disciples learned this that day, not from a sermon, but from the absence that remained. Master Togen lives on, not in statues, not in scriptures, not in recorded sayings, but in how the monks now move. With care, with presence, with awareness that each moment is a wick, each breath a flame. So when your time comes, be like the candle. Don't worry about your legacy. Focus on your light. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. Once there was a king who ruled over a vast and golden land. His palace was made of marble and sandalwood. His robes shimmered with threads of moonlight. His name echoed through the valleys like a song carried on wind. But one day, in the middle of a grand festival, the king grew suddenly tired. He stepped away from the court, laid down in the shade of a fig tree, and closed his eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, he dreamed. In the dream, he was no longer a king. He was a farmer. His hands were calloused. His home was a straw hut. He tilled the soil each morning, worked through sweat and storm, and fell asleep beside a dying lantern. Years passed in this dream. He married, had children, lost crops, buried a son. He aged, sickened, and finally lay dying in his dream bed of straw, holding his daughter's hand. As he drew his last breath, he awoke, back under the fig tree, back in silk, back in the sound of distant music from the palace. No time had passed. Only the blink of an eye, he sat up and wept. This is the story of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and illusion. Commentary. The Buddha once said, "This world is a dream, a bubble, a shadow. See it as such." But it does not mean the world is meaningless. It means that clinging to the dream, believing it is the whole of reality, is what causes suffering. The king's dream felt real. He loved. He cried. He endured, and yet it was only a flicker in his mind. When he awoke, he was still himself, still whole, still the same awareness, only now, clearer. So too with rebirth. You are born into a form, live a life, gather names, habits, memories, and when that form ends, the awareness that knew it does not die. It simply moves, like a dreamer waking into another dream. Samsara is not a punishment. It is a lesson, a series of dreams to awaken from. Not by denying them, but by seeing through them. When the king returned to court, he no longer ruled with pride. He ruled with humility, with tenderness, as one who knew that even a crown is made of the same dust as a farmer's hoe. He often sat under that same fig tree in silence. When people asked why, he would only say, "That is where I remembered." One day, he invited monks to his court. Among them was a sage known for his stillness. The king asked him, "How do I know which world is the dream and which is true?" The monk replied with a smile, "Ask the one who is watching them both." Who is that? The witness, the awareness, the one who saw the king dreaming of the farmer, the one who sees you dreaming this life. It is not your name, not your face, not even your memories. It is that which knows, always watching, always here, even as the dream changes. This is the mind beyond mind, the unshaken center, the part of you that does not sleep, even when the body rests. The Buddha's teachings do not try to wake you with alarm bells. They whisper. They let you walk the path until one day, under a tree or beside a river or in a quiet moment between breaths, you see it for yourself. This is a dream. And yet, I am real. The king died many years later, not in fear, but as one who knew how dreams begin and end. He left behind a poem carved into the fig tree. When I was awake, I thought I ruled. When I slept, I thought I served. Now I know I am neither, I am the dreamer and the waking. So when the world feels heavy or the illusion too thick, sit quietly, breathe, and ask yourself, what part of me is watching this? Not to escape the dream, but to wait kindly inside it. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so..." "Yes?" Another frowned. "But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom, it's powerlessness." A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. "All 3 of you are correct," he said, "depending on how you define freedom." He continued, "Most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us." He looked out the open window. "But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances." The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. "If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, 'I failed.'" There was a pause. One novice finally asked, "Then what is the lesson, Master?" Shiro replied softly, "There are times to steer and times to yield." He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. "You cannot hold the wind in your hands," he said, "but you can feel its path against your face." He paused, "And when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm." The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, "Carried, yet free." There's a saying in Zen Buddhism: "The bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass." The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. It started like any other Monday. The inbox blinked with urgency. 142 unread. A blinking red light on the office phone. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. Slack notifications multiplying like rabbits in spring. Julian sipped lukewarm coffee and took a deep breath. Then he dove in. He was efficient, smart, reliable, they called him, always responsive, always ready, always tired. Somewhere between the 7th reply and the 4th Zoom call, he noticed his chest tightening. Nothing sharp, just a quiet constriction, a warning like a traffic light blinking yellow. But he kept going, because the world rewarded output. And silence. Silence didn't show up on KP is. By 4 p.m., his eyes burned. By 6 p.m., he was still typing. He didn't hear the rain start, didn't notice the tea growing cold beside his keyboard, until a calendar reminder popped up. Meditation class, 6:30 p.m., room 4B. He had signed up weeks ago, half joking, a resolution maybe. He almost closed the tab, but something, maybe the silence behind the noise, nudged him. Room 4B was warm, soft lighting, folded cushions, a bell. Only 6 people sat in the circle. A woman at the front, maybe late 40s, calm-eyed, greeted him with a nod, not words. "Sit however you like," she said. Julian sat stiffly, still in his button-up, still full of digital momentum. The teacher closed her eyes, spoke gently. "Let the inbox go. Let the to-do list drop its grip. Notice the breath, that's all." Julian's mind raced. The Henderson file, the Q4 budget, the message he forgot to reply to. But the bell rang again, soft and clear, like a sound not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, his thoughts became less sticky. After 20 minutes, she said, "Busy is not always bad, but sometimes it's a way of avoiding stillness. Ask yourself, what would I hear if I stopped pretending I didn't have time to listen?" Julian felt something twist. Not painfully, just honestly, because beneath the notifications and meetings and perfectly managed chaos was a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. It didn't ask for much, just a pause, a breath, a life lived on purpose, not just performed. That night, he walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no rush. Each raindrop felt like punctuation in a sentence he had forgotten how to read. The next morning, his inbox was just as full, but he didn't open it right away. He brewed tea, sat for 5 minutes, watched the steam rise and disappear. And in those 5 minutes, he remembered he was alive, not just employed. Julian didn't quit his job, didn't move to the mountains. He still answered emails, still ran meetings. But once a day, he closed the laptop, turned off the noise, and let the silence speak. The Buddha never warned about email, but he did say, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes peace is not found in responding faster. It's found in not responding at all, at least for a moment. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those planes. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same. Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Uddaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed, the world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm, the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes. He had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the colour in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering. The sun passed. The moon rose. Birds quieted. Winds stilled. And in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at 2 saplings growing side by side. These trees, he said, were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives. The students blinked. They look the same, said one. The sage only smiled. Wait. And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them. Sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave, but over time it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it, but its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down?" The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room. The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped, its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. "No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be." And so, it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good?" "Yes," the sage said gently. "It lived a life of service, and that is honorable." He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure. There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight." And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows, but sometimes what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. It is said that if you gaze long enough at the full moon, you may see not a face, but a shape, a small, still shape, hunched and silent, a hair, curled in the center of silver light. In forests and villages, monks and children alike have told the story of how that hair came to be there, not for magic, but for meaning. Because once, long ago, when the Buddha lived a life not as a king, not as a sage, but as a simple forest hare, he offered something no other could. The forest in those days was peaceful. The trees were tall and generous, the rivers clear, the days warm, and the nights cool like silk. And in a soft clearing where sunlight filtered through leaves like golden rain, there lived 4 friends: a monkey, an otter, a jackal, and a hare. Each day they met beneath the same fig tree. They shared stories, laughed together, and vowed to live simply, offering kindness to all creatures. The hare, though smallest, was the quiet heart of the group. He spoke little but listened well. He never hoarded, never pushed, and his silence made room for the truth in others to unfold. One day, the hare turned to his friends as they sat in the cool shade. "Tomorrow is the holy day," he said softly. "The day of giving. If someone comes to us in need, we must give all we can." The others nodded eagerly. "I will gather fish from the river," said the otter. "I will collect ripe mangoes and figs," said the monkey. "I will steal curdled milk from the village shrine," said the jackal, grinning. The hare said nothing. "What about you?" they asked. He looked down. "I have no fruit, no claws to fish, no cleverness to steal. All I eat is grass." He looked up at the sky. "So, if someone comes in need, I will give them myself." The others fell silent. The wind stirred the fig leaves above them, and somewhere far off, as though moved by the weight of the hare's words, the world shifted. That night, as stars bloomed across the sky, the great deity Chakra, ruler of the heavens, heard of the hare's vow. He was curious. Among all the creatures, who would truly give without pride? Who would offer not for reward, but for love? So Chakra descended to earth, not in thunder or gold, but disguised as an old, starving hermit, his robe tattered, his hands trembling with hunger. At dawn, he approached the clearing. The 4 friends welcomed him with reverence. "I am hungry," he said. "I have not eaten in days." The otter offered his fresh fish. The monkey gave sweet mangoes. The jackal, grinning, placed stolen butter and curds at his feet. Then the hare stepped forward. "I have nothing," he said gently, "but I will not break my vow." He turned to his friends. "Build a fire." They looked at him in confusion. He nodded. "Yes, a fire." As the flames rose, the hare bowed before the hermit. "I offer you the only thing I have, my body." And with that, he leapt toward the fire. But the flames did not burn. They shimmered and vanished. And in their place stood Chakra, radiant in divine form, his eyes filled with both sorrow and awe. "O noble hare," he said, "you were willing to give your very life without hesitation, without desire for praise. In all the worlds, I have not seen a gift so pure." He reached down and gently lifted the hare. "I will not let you die. Instead, your story shall live beyond this forest, beyond this age." Chakra turned his gaze to the sky, and with a wave of his hand, he painted the hare's image on the moon. From that day on, when the full moon rises over rivers and rice fields, over temples and rooftops and sleeping children, the hare watches from above. Not as a god, not as a legend, but as a reminder that the greatest gift is not gold, not grain, not clever words or rituals. It is the gift of selfless love. In time, the monkey, the otter, and even the jackal remembered the moment not with sorrow, but with wonder. They told it to their children. The forest grew quiet when the moon was full, and the fig tree always held a soft space beneath it, as if waiting. The story of the hare passed from mouth to mouth, country to country, century to century, and even now, if you ask an elder monk or a village storyteller why the moon glows so brightly, they may smile and say, "It's the light of a little forest hare." Still giving, still watching, still reminding us what it means to love completely. Because generosity is not measured in size, but in sincerity. And there is no gift greater than offering your whole self, freely, without fear. Not for recognition, but because it is right. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. High in the hills above a quiet town, there stood a temple. Its walls were weathered by wind and time, its steps worn smooth by generations of sandals, its prayer flags faded but still fluttering, and in its tallest tower hung a bell, massive, bronze, perfectly cast. It had been gifted by a distant king centuries ago, carried up the mountain by oxen and monks, polished each year, respected, admired, but never rung, not once. The bell had a name, Resonance of the Mountain. Inscribed around its rim were words in a forgotten tongue. It was said to hold the most beautiful sound ever forged, so pure, so deep, that it would quiet all suffering for a moment. But no one had ever heard it, because the abbot long ago had made a vow: let the bell only ring when the world is ready to listen. And so it waited and waited. Pilgrims climbed the hill just to see it. Children dared each other to touch the rope, but none pulled. It became a symbol of restraint, of mystery, of potential, and eventually, of silence too deep to question. One day, a novice asked the elder monk, "Why don't we ring it?" The monk shrugged, because it was meant to be rung, but never was. The novice frowned. Then what's the point of its sound? The monk looked out at the horizon and replied, "You tell me." The story of the bell spread like smoke, and in time, people began to wonder how many other bells go unrung, not made of bronze, but of possibility. There was a painter who never showed her art, a musician who kept every song in his notebook, a teacher who knew how to heal but doubted her voice, a young man who wrote letters he never sent, a woman who forgave but never said the words aloud. Each of them had a bell, hanging in the tower of their own life, polished, admired, imagined, but never heard. This is the parable of unused potential. The Dharma teaches us about impermanence, yes, but also about urgency, not frantic urgency, but gentle, clear truth. This life will not wait forever, and the sound in you deserves to be shared. The bell was never rung, not because it couldn't be, but because someone was waiting for perfect conditions, for absolute certainty, for a sign. But life rarely gives signs, only moments, and you must choose to meet them. There is a Zen story of a man who stands beside a river. He thirsts, but waits for the perfect reflection to appear on the surface before drinking. He dies with water at his feet. What sound do you carry within you? What truth, what offering, what kindness left unsaid, what creation unwritten, what forgiveness unopened? Letting your bell ring does not require a crowd. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true and shared. One evening, a new abbot arrived at the temple. She had studied the bell's history, had bowed to it many times. And then, one spring morning, as the valley bloomed, she climbed the tower and pulled the rope. The sound that followed was not loud, not shocking, but profound. It rolled through the mountains like a low tide, clear, mournful, joyful, full. Birds rose into the air. Monks paused mid-step. Villagers lifted their heads from bowls and windows. And in that moment, everything was still. Not because they heard something new, but because they heard something they had always carried inside. Then the bell was silent again. But something had changed. The abbot later said, "A bell is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be heard. And so are we." Commentary. This parable asks a quiet but urgent question. What are you holding back? Not out of wisdom, but out of fear. The sound in you may not end suffering. It may not change the world, but it may change a moment. It may reach one person. It may free your own breath, and that is enough. We often wait for permission, for clarity, for mastery, for the right time. But the bell does not ask, "Will I be understood?" It asks, "Will I be true?" The world is filled with unwritten books, unsung songs, unspoken love, unrung bells, and it is not failure to stay silent, but it is loss of what could have been shared, loss of what someone else needed to hear, even if only once. You don't have to shout. You don't have to perform. You just have to let your voice exist, to let the truth you carry move from silence into air. So ring your bell, tell your story, share your art, speak your heart, forgive, laugh, cry, begin again, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if no one claps. Let the sound live outside of you. Let it ripple. Let it go. Because a silent bell may be beautiful, but only a ringing bell is alive. The banks of the Ganges shimmered with morning light. Mist curled like white breath from the earth, and birds traced wide arcs above the water. The river flowed as it always had, unhurried, ancient, indifferent. Upon a small rise near the city of Gaya, the Buddha stood. His saffron robes caught the first golden threads of sunlight, and his presence seemed to quiet even the wind. Around him gathered 1,000 ascetics, silent, weathered, lean with years of discipline. Their robes were coarse, their skin bronzed by fire and wind. Their eyes held questions that words could not form. They had come to hear him, not because he promised liberation, but because he had found it. These were men who had walked barefoot on burning sand, who had held their breath until stars blurred in their vision, who had fasted until even hunger grew silent. They had known pain. They had studied sacred fire. They had chanted, scarred, endured. But they had not known peace. And so they came, not to challenge, but to listen. The Buddha began not with praise, nor with rules, nor with doctrine. He began with fire. "All is burning," he said. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across tall grass. He paused, let the silence stretch, like the space between flames. "All is burning," he repeated. "The I is burning. Forms are burning. I consciousness is burning." He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word striking like a drumbeat in the still morning air. Burning with what? With the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion? Some closed their eyes, others frowned. A few leaned forward, their breaths caught. The Buddha looked upon them, not with challenge, but with compassion. "This body you cling to," he said, "it is a wick. This mind you chase through craving, a spark. And each time you grasp, each time you say, 'mine,' you feed the fire." A breeze moved across the Ganges. It stirred the edges of robes. It cooled nothing. The Buddha continued. "The world is ablaze, but not with wood and coal. It burns with longing. with grasping, with thirst. He walked slowly among them, not above, not apart. His steps made no sound. Eyes that chase beauty, ears that crave praise, tongues that seek sweetness, minds that hunger for permanence. He turned and lifted his simple alms bowl. This too is not mine. It holds food today. Tomorrow, it may be empty. I thank it either way. From the back, an old ascetic raised his hand. Are we to abandon joy? He asked. Is not joy the goal? The Buddha smiled faintly. No, he said. Not joy. Only the craving for joy. Let joy arise. Let it come like wind through trees. But do not chase it. Do not bind to it. Do not say, this is mine. For the flame you grasp will burn your hand. Another monk asked quietly, how do we live in a burning world? The Buddha looked at him with eyes deep as a still lake. Like a man who sees the blaze, he said. Who walks with care, breathes with wisdom, and holds no illusion that the fire is shelter. A hush fell over the gathering, not from fear, but from recognition. The fire was not only in the cities, or in war, or in anger. It was inside them, inside each grasping thought, each clenched desire. The Buddha sat upon the earth. He drew a circle in the dust with his finger. Inside this circle, he said, are your perceptions, your feelings, your ideas. They rise like smoke. They change like flame. They disappear like ash. Do not build your home in a fire. A younger monk, no more than 20 summers old, whispered, then where do we dwell, Master? The Buddha looked up. In awareness, he said. In equanimity. In the space between sparks. Be the witness, not the fuel. The monks bowed their heads. Some wept. Not from sorrow, but from something else. From release, from clarity, from the sudden lightness of realizing they could put something down. That night, they built no fires. There were no chants, no ceremonies. They ate simply, drank river water, and sat in silence. But the silence was not empty. It was watchful. Each monk sat with his own flickering flame. Some remembered the pain of hunger they had forced upon themselves. Others remembered the pride they had felt when praised for discipline. Some saw anger they had not named, others grief, and they did not suppress these fires. They simply watched. And in the watching, something shifted. Not extinguished, but no longer fed. In the days that followed, the change was quiet but real. Monks who had once worshipped sacred flame, who had walked barefoot on coals, branded their skin, sat in the sun for days, now turned to a gentler discipline. They practiced release. They rose with the sun. They swept the courtyard slowly. They bowed not to fire, but to understanding. When visitors asked them what the Buddha had taught that morning, they did not recite scriptures. They did not speak of rebirth or karma or cosmology. They said only, he showed us the fire and told us we did not have to live in it. The fire sermon was spoken many times across the years, but none more powerful than that first morning on the river bank, when the smoke from the city's cooking fires curled upward, mirroring the craving in every heart, and the Buddha, with nothing in his hands and peace in his gaze, simply said, let it burn, let it pass, and do not be consumed. There was once a kingdom where wisdom was prized like gold. Rulers held council with monks. Children learn not only how to count, but how to think. And among its most respected voices was a wandering teacher known simply as the Buddha. He did not wear jewels, he did not shout, but when he spoke, even the birds seemed to pause. And one day, in the town square of a village nestled near the banks of the Ganges, he told a story. Not to entertain, but to reveal. The dispute began with laughter, then sharp words. A group of scholars, each confident in his own tradition, had come to debate. Some were Brahmins, others were ascetics. A few belonged to newer sects, filled with fiery conviction and scrolls still smelling of fresh ink. They spoke of truth, of soul, of self, of afterlife, of permanence, of nothingness. Each man insisted his view was the whole, complete, correct. The others, misguided, foolish, dangerous. They argued beneath a fig tree, loud enough that passers-by turned to look. A merchant chuckled, a potter shook his head, a child pointed and whispered, "They sound like crows fighting over the same grain." When the Buddha arrived, he did not interrupt. He simply sat and waited until their voices began to falter, some from exhaustion, some from shame. And into that space, he placed his voice like a drop of water on a still pond. "There was once a king," the Buddha began, "who summoned 6 men born blind since birth." The scholars fell quiet. The king told them, "I will allow you to encounter something magnificent. Tell me what it is." The blind men were curious, eager. They were led one by one to a massive animal they had never known, a mighty elephant. Each man was guided to touch a different part. The first reached out and felt the flank. He pressed his palms against its broad, warm side and declared, "Ah, an elephant is like a wall, wide and unmoving." The second grasped the tusk, smooth and curved like polished stone. "No, no," he said. "An elephant is like a spear, sharp and strong." The third took hold of the trunk, which coiled and shifted in his arms. "You're both wrong. It is like a snake, alive, twisting, breathing." The fourth felt the knee, round and solid. "Clearly, it is like a tree trunk," he announced, "thick and rooted." The fifth wrapped his hands around the ear, which flapped gently like a fan. "You are mistaken. An elephant is a large fan, waving back and forth." The last man touched the tail, thin and rope-like. No, it's a rope. A coarse, swaying rope." When they were brought back together, the king asked, "Well, what is an elephant?" And the shouting began. Each man insisted he was right. Each accused the others of ignorance. Each swore he had touched the truth with his own hands. And in a way, they had. The Buddha paused. The scholars sat frozen, the parable hanging in the air like incense smoke. Each man, he said, encountered only a part. Each was sincere, each described what he felt, and yet none saw the whole. He looked at each scholar now, gently, without judgment. "So it is with many truths. You may touch a piece and call it the whole, but when clinging to fragments, conflict follows." One of the younger scholars frowned. "But teacher," he said slowly, "does that mean there is no truth?" The Buddha smiled, not to mock, but to soften. "Number, It means that truth is vast, and the mind must be vast to hold it. One who sees the trunk and believes it is a snake is not lying, but he is also not seeing clearly. Another monk, one who had remained quiet through the debate, bowed. And what, Blessed One, is the way to see the whole? The Buddha turned his palm upward, a gesture of openness. Humility, listening, letting go of the need to be right. When you stop clinging to your peace, you make space for someone else's. And in that space, something greater may arise. The fig tree rustled gently above them. A breeze passed through the square. The tension had broken. One of the elders leaned forward. His voice was softer now. I have spent my life defending what I thought was the whole elephant, but now I wonder if I have only touched the tail. The Buddha nodded. Then you are further along the path than many who still cling to the tusk. That night, as lamps flickered in the homes of the village, the story traveled from mouth to mouth. Children reenacted the blind men, bumping into trees and miming trunks and tails. Elders sat in circles, wondering what part they had touched in their own lives, what truths they had guarded too tightly. And in one small home, a young girl asked her grandmother, "What does the whole elephant look like?" The old woman smiled. "We may never know for sure," she said. "But if we all share what we felt, maybe we can come closer." And so, the parable of the blind men and the elephant was passed on, not as a warning against belief, but as an invitation to perspective, to listen, to learn, to let go of the walls we build around our understanding. Centuries later, the story would still be told, in temples, in schools, in circles of debate and doubt. And always, it would whisper the same truth. No one sees everything, but together we can see more. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. He sat at the back of the community hall, near the exit. Not hiding, just watching. The others talked, laughed, poured coffee from large silver thermoses and passed around paper cookies from supermarket trays. But he didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched. His name was Curtis. Army jacket, grey beard, hands that twitched slightly even when still. He had come to the meditation group because his VA counselor suggested it. "You don't have to talk," she said. "Just show up." So he did, and for 6 weeks, he said nothing. But he returned. Same chair, same silence, same eyes that carried too many memories to speak aloud. The teacher never pressed. A woman in her 50s with a quiet strength. She guided them through breath awareness, walking meditations, and loving kindness phrases that sometimes made people cry without knowing why. Curtis never joined the group circle, never chanted, but he always listened. This is not a story about what was said. It's a story about the space that held what could not be said. One evening, during a guided meditation, the teacher said, "Imagine someone you've never forgiven. Now imagine letting go, not for them, but for your own peace." Curtis's jaw clenched. His breathing grew sharp. Then, it softened. After the session, he didn't leave right away. He walked slowly to the window. looked out at the parking lot lights reflected in puddles, and whispered, "I used to listen for footsteps every night." The teacher said nothing, just turned to stand beside him. Curtis continued, eyes still out the window. "In Iraq, we slept light. One sound, just one, meant someone might die. When I came home, the silence felt louder than the gunfire." She nodded, not with pity, but with understanding. "The breath," she said softly, "is where the past visits, but does not have to stay." Curtis nodded once, not to agree, but to acknowledge. In Buddhism, there's a concept called the middle way. Not indulgence, not denial, just being with what is without running or pushing. Curtis didn't heal overnight. There was no miracle. But he started walking more, started breathing deeper, started sitting with his pain instead of being swallowed by it. And slowly, the silence became less sharp. One night after the group had left, he stayed behind. He rolled up the mats, wiped the floor with quiet care, turned off the lights, and before he left, he bowed. No one saw it, no one needed to. There's a koan that says, "Show me your original face, the one you had before the world told you who to be." Curtis was learning to meet that face again. Not as a soldier, not as a broken man, but as someone who could sit with sorrow without becoming it. One evening, a new veteran came to the group. Stiff posture, uneasy eyes. Curtis noticed. After the session, he walked over and offered a single sentence. "Don't worry, you don't have to say anything." Then he sat down beside him, and they watched the rain together. Healing isn't loud. It's not sudden. Sometimes it sounds like silence learning to be gentle. There was a spider who spun her web in the rafters of the meditation hall. No one noticed her at first. She was small, thin-legged, her thread finer than the morning mist. But slowly as the days passed, her web grew, spanning beam to beam. A fragile bridge suspended in stillness. A young monk sweeping the floors one morning looked up. He paused. Something about the web held him. It glimmered faintly in the dawn light, each thread stretching toward another as if in quiet conversation. He brought his discovery to the abbot. "Should I remove it?" he asked. "It doesn't belong in the hall." The abbot looked up, tilted his head, smiled. "She belongs exactly where she is," he said, "and perhaps she's teaching more than we are." From that day forward, the monks left the web untouched. They meditated beneath it, bowed in its presence, watched as dew sometimes gathered along its strands, like pearls of stillness. One day, the young monk saw a tiny gnat caught in the web. He felt a pang of sorrow, moved closer, but before he could act, the spider emerged, wrapped the insect, and retreated. He asked the abbot again, "How can something so beautiful cause harm?" The abbot nodded slowly. "A web is not cruel," he said. "It is simply a truth." He continued, "Connection is not always comfort, but everything touches everything else." He gestured around the hall. "You see walls, mats, windows, candles, but they are not separate." He pointed up. "That spider reminds us. One thread trembles, and the whole web feels it." The monk began to notice more. How a sharp word at breakfast changed the tone of the morning. How a kind gesture rippled through the day. How his own thoughts, when tangled, echoed outward into others. One evening during Zazen, a gust of wind slipped through the shutters. The spider's web quivered, and every monk in the room turned slightly. Not toward the wind, but toward the movement of the web, as if they all felt it at once. There is a teaching in the Avatamsaka Sutra. In the realm of Indra's net, each jewel reflects all others. To touch one is to touch the whole. The spider did not preach. She simply spun, her work invisible until noticed, and then unforgettable. Months later, the web collapsed in a storm. Gone, no trace. But the young monk no longer looked for it above. He had begun to see the web everywhere. In the way the cook's ladle touched the soup pot, in the way the bell echoed down the hallway, in the way a smile from a stranger reached deep into his chest. Everything, connected, everything, touching, nothing, alone. A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar, but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveller had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness, a wave, is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line, emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren, It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveller looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow, all temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. You don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveller reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there, and you will return to it, not lost, but home. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.